Tune in, this is where it's at. The Fantasy Football Plug Podcast. You know that we got it popping. Oh yeah, that's apparent. Got a shout out to my homie, one and only Jay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much for tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Plug Podcast. I, of course, am Jay the Plug with my man, Michael Florio. What's happening, my man?
Not much. Happy to have football back. Happy, to be in this routine every week that is fantasy football, and very happy that you asked me to come on this podcast. I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, man, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for coming in. For those of you who don't know, which I'm sure it's a very, very small few that don't know about Michael Florio, he is an analyst for NFL Network on NFL Fantasy Now. Also host of Rotoballer Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Eastern. So whenever you guys need anything fantasy-wise, hit my guy up. He knows exactly what you need. As you all know, I'm the plug. I like to get you what you need when you need it, as often as you need it, and this guy can definitely help you out. Michael, awesome to have you, my man. So my thing is I love to get to know my guests, and especially being with NFL Network. I mean, that's my ultimate goal, is to become a fantasy football analyst, a sports broadcaster, all that. First question, my man, what got you started?
I joined my first ever fantasy football league when I was in high school. I remember to this day, like, Maurice Jones-Drew was my first ever pick, and he led me to a championship. And now that working at the network with him, I've gotten to tell him that, which I never imagined I would have ever gotten the chance to do. I just, ever since I joined my first fantasy football league, I just became hooked on the game. Fantasy football, I'm a really big fantasy baseball player as well too. So I love the game of fantasy. And then when I was in college, me and a buddy of mine, actually, Frank Stamfel, he now works over at CBS Sports, hosting their fantasy baseball podcast. We decided, we went to high school together. We've been friends now since we're like 14, 15 years old. And when we were in college, we decided with the buddy of ours who was at the time, majoring in like website design, we were like, hey, why don't the three of us come together? Like, one guy can design the website and put that on his resume, and the other two can write about fantasy football and put that on our resume and see if it leads to anything. And I'm very, very, very happy that site that I first created does not exist anymore, because the advice was, I'm sure, subpar. It was pretty basic. I was just some college kid really just dabbling in fantasy football. But ever since then, and really ever since I realized when I was in college that, like, hey, there's people who, they do this full time, right? Like, they have this as their job. Ever since that point, I kind of was driven to be like, this is what I want to do. And even when I had, jobs that weren't in fantasy, because there was a lot of those along the way, I always did fantasy on the side. Like, basically for over 10 years now, I've written and podcasted and hosted shows about fantasy football. So it started at a very young age for me, and it's just something that has kind of been my passion ever since.
That's fantastic, man. That's cool. Both you and a buddy living the dream. That's awesome. That's very cool.
It really is.
So when you were in high school, you basically just, like, as you were in high school, you decided you wanted a career in fantasy football.
So when I was in high school, I fell in love with, like, the game of fantasy. It was when I was in college that I realized that this could actually be a career path. And I remember the day I realized it. I was getting in, a friend of mine, his dad was picking us up from a Met game, and he had Sirius XM Fantasy on. And I was like, wait, there's a radio station where they talk fantasy sports 24 hours a day? And he was like, yeah. And then, like, when I started to play more, I remember I would, like, on my college lunch break, like, there was an hour for lunch, I would go, and wherever I was eating, like, I'd pull out my phone or laptop and I would watch, like, different fantasy football shows, like, that were just web shows at the time. But, like, the more that I realized, like, hey, there's more and more content out there than I realized, that's when it hit me that, like, fantasy is going to take off, and there's going to be more job opportunities like this. And it took a long time and I'm still really working to get, to where I ultimately would like to be. But I think that there's lots more opportunity now, and fantasy is so much bigger than it was, even 5-10 years ago, that if this is something that you love and this is a passion of yours, I think now is a really good time for anyone who's thinking about throwing their hat into the ring, even if it's just writing an article on the side or hosting a podcast on the side. You never know what it could lead to, because the fantasy community as a whole is very accepting, very, I think it's very, like we all like to prop each other up and support each other's works. And it's really not so much viewed as like we're competing against one another, as kind of like we're all pushing for this thing that we love to get to the height that we all think is very possible for it to get to.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself, man. That's awesome. So how long have you been with the NFL Network now?
So this is my 3rd year with the NFL Network. This is my 1st year, though, doing anything on air. Okay. I moved from New York City. I was born and raised in New York, lived there my whole life, applied for the job at NFL Network without realizing that it was in LA, because I used to walk past the NFL office every single day on my way to work in New York. I was like, oh, I'll just work a couple blocks up. And then they were like, oh, no, this is in the studio in LA. So I got the job, decided to take it and move out to LA, and I was just a fantasy football researcher on NFL Fantasy Live. Like, my job was to look up like the stats that you'll see on graphics and stuff, and I still do that. Half the time I'm working right now, half my week is spent on research still. And in year 1, they realized that, like, and I kind of pushed for it a little bit myself, but I was very lucky that there was people who were willing to give me the opportunity. They were like, hey, why don't you write an article once a week for us? And I said, yeah. And that started my year 1 there, doing any content for them. And then in year 2, that grew to, hey, we can give you 2 articles a week this year. And I was like, the more the merrier. And then that led to, they have a feature on NFL Fantasy app. It's called like Player Stories, where it's kind of like Instagram, right? Like, you'll see a circle around your player, you click their face, and it's one of our analysts telling you what you need to know about that player that week. So with that got launched in my 2nd season last year, and they were like, hey, you want to help out on that? And you could do, as many as you want per week. So I started, I would stay late or come in early or whatever, just to do more of those videos and just kind of get out there and get the reps and get the practice being on air. And then this year, knock on wood, I was very lucky to get the opportunity to kind of split my time and be, part a researcher, part analyst, and get to go on air on NFL Fantasy Live, which, like you said, is a complete dream come true. I get to host a podcast with Marcus Grant, who is one of the absolute very best in this industry, and I get to host shows with Adam Rank, who is one of the most entertaining people in our industry, and I get to work with a lot of really great people and get a lot of opportunity. But at the same point in time, I will say, like, if this is something that you want to do, it is attainable, but you have to be willing to, I think, put in the work. A lot of really long days, a lot of long hours have been put to getting to this job, and a lot of writing articles, staying up late or waking up early or anything, and waking up at 4 a.m. on Christmas just to get a guest spot on a radio show is something that I've once done. So I think if you want this to be a career path, it is attainable, but just know going in, it is going to be a lot of hard work to get there. But in my opinion, it is very much worth it if you get where you want to go.
For sure, man. Yeah, I'm anybody listening to this, I'm down for the hours. I'm good at it. I'm working in the car business. I'm at 13, 14 hours a day, so it's crazy. But I know
that football schedule then.
What you were saying about Rank and Marcus Grant, I was blessed enough to be able to interview them as well, and they were just great guys. They still keep in touch. They're just fantastic guys. Now, I noticed that you got a heck of a beard on you, man. Does Rank ever give you crap about it, like wanting to be the only guy bald in the beard? I mean, you're not bald. You got a good head of hair on you.
I'm not bald yet, knock on wood. The beard, I get compliments on it a lot more than I ever expected. Rank has made jokes about the beard and how, like, he was the first guy here with the beard, but he does not want to be the only one. He's been very accepting of another bearded person getting to host alongside of him.
Oh, yeah. He told me the only reason that he gave me a shot was because I had the beard and I was bald. So that's okay.
Us beard guys got to stick together.
Yeah, for sure, man. Got you. Anytime. If you're ever in the ATL, I got you, man. Anything you need. Yeah, and Marcus, I never realized exactly how skilled of a writer he was, man. Have you read his screenplays at all?
No, I have not read his screenplays.
So,
Now I'm gonna ask him though.
make sure you do. I've told him he's got to finish it up, man. There's one about it's called Just Win, Baby. I got to know what happens to Trent. That's all I'm going to say. Just look, you'll find it, man. It's fantastic.
And now I'm gonna ask him, and I want to read it like immediately now.
It's unreal. It's unreal. I've got it. I saved it on the desktop. I'll send it to you. It's awesome.
That's great.
All right, so let's get to a little bit of fantasy football, Mr. Florio. Do you have a specific way you like to draft whenever draft day comes?
Yes, I do. So I've changed it over the years because I think that no strategy is ever perfect or complete, and if you're not working on your craft, what are you doing? So I like to fine tool my strategy each year, and this year I went, I think, a little bit more extreme in my strategy than ever before. But I looked at the player pool heading into this year and was like, running back is thinning more than ever. Like, there was 12, 13 guys that I was comfortable with as my RB1. And then I would look at the third, fourth, fifth round of drafts and be like, I can get a wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 that I'm happy with as my top 3 guys in those 3 rounds. And even after that, in the middle and later rounds of drafts, I just felt like from rounds 3 or 4 on, wide receiver was so much better than running back in each round. So my strategy in the early rounds this year was get your running backs. Like, I was loading up getting 2, 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds of all of my drafts. Like, and while I said there was 12 or 13 that I was comfortable with as my RB1, Chris Carson and Jonathan Taylor were like my next 2. Like, they were in my top 15 RB rankings, and I have a lot of those guys. And through 2 weeks, it's paid off. And Jonathan Taylor, I truly believe, is going to win a lot of people, a lot of leagues this year. So I would get those guys in the second or third rounds, and then I would start to load up on wide receiver. But the other change that I made, and it is one that I'm going to stick with because I think it is just – it is how you win in fantasy football, and it is just targeting upside. And my whole thing is I would look at – after each season I look at my teams, and I started to realize that my teams were more similar at the end of the year than a lot of other people's. And I realized that I was doing that because I was drafting players that I thought were – values at their ADP, like guys like Jamison Crowder, like D.D. Westbrook was one I liked last year. And I always find like running backs, and I'm like, all right, this guy's going to get a little bit more touches than we expect. And those are safe floor players that if you ever are in a pinch, you could throw them in your lineup without having to worry. But what I realized is I would be holding those guys on my bench all year as like kind of break-in case of emergency players, like in case someone got hurt or in case I had a bye week. Right. But I realized that when I had to use those players, my lineup 1 was already worse because I'm taking someone that I start each week out and putting someone that's on my bench each week in. Sorry if the lights are going crazy. My dog loves to shake the blinds in my apartment and just make a big ruckus. But back to the strategy. Yeah. So I realized that like, I would just have these players on my bench all year, and if I had to put them in, my optimal lineup was already going down, and I was kind of hoping then that the teams that I was playing against weren't going off because I was going to have a solid showing each week, but if they just had someone that completely went off, I probably wasn't going to be able to match that. So my approach this year is the complete opposite. Like, throw all of those safe, those like boring, low floor, but not really the highest ceiling players. I don't want any part of them. Like, Adrian Peterson is not going to be touching any of my rosters, even if he is the Lions starter the rest of the way, because he may give us a safe 10 or 11 points, but that to me isn't going to win me a championship. So I started targeting the highest upside players. Like, I have a ton of Will Fuller. I think Will Fuller, if he stays healthy, is going to win a lot of people leagues. And in the double-digit rounds, I was just taking these high upside players. Some will hit, some won't, most won't. But at least if those don't hit, I can realize that pretty early, and then I could just keep taking these waiver wire flyers all year and hoping that something hits. Because if I find 1 or 2 breakout players paired with what I believe I'm a good drafter. So with a solid starting lineup, like I think that is how fantasy championships are won. And I want to play to win. I don't want to play to make the playoffs and get bounced in the first round.
Fair warning to anybody playing this, man. God bless. Yeah, I'm the same way, man. I like a lot of high upside. I really do. I didn't really touch Will Fuller in too many of my drafts just because most people reach for him a little bit more. I'm more of a when the guy's normally injured, I try to stay away. But, I mean, man, you never know. If Will Fuller stays healthy, just like you said, he's a top-tier receiver easily.
We've gotten both sides of the Will Fuller coin already through 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah, very true. So who do you think – like, I mean, are there any players that you see surprising anyone by the end of the year? I mean, anybody you think is going to bust tremendously or anybody you think is just going to really pop for someone?
Yeah, so right now the players that I'm worried about, like I think Todd Gurley right now is one that I'm really worried about. He has not looked like the Todd Gurley of old. I'm just concerned that knee injury is just going to sap him of what he was. And it pains me to say that because Todd Gurley was my favorite player from when he entered the league until like I was backing him in fantasy drafts and everything, but after last season, I thought that was the beginning of the end for Gurley, and the move to Atlanta hasn't really, at least through 2 weeks, helped too much. Like I don't want any part of any Jets players whatsoever. Like I was avoiding Bell and a lot of them coming into drafts. One player, though, that I am advocating, and waivers ran in my leagues, and he still did not get picked up, and I kind of kicked myself for not grabbing him earlier. But one player I'm trying to get now on all my secondary waivers this week is Michael Pittman Jr. Like, I think he low-key has a lot of opportunity there because Jack Doyle's hurt right now. Paris Campbell might be out for the season. T.Y. Hilton hasn't really looked like T.Y. Hilton of old. So I think there's going to be opportunity there, and Michael Pittman very well could slide in and be the second option in this passing game. So he is someone that would fit the bill of one of those like high upside waiver wire flyers that I'm targeting this week.
Absolutely, man. I was praising Michael Pittman when he got drafted because I like a T.Y. Hilton, but it's the same thing when it comes to injury and things like that. There's thing that constantly going around, injury prone and all this stuff. I mean, whatever with that, but and then I look back and I noticed that T.Y. wasn't as hurt as I thought he normally was. So I was just like, man, it just must have been some of those games that he just didn't blow up. But Pittman has definitely got the skills to really, really blow up and help people's teams for sure. So let me ask you, so you're looking at waivers for week 3, of course. Who is top of your list?
So it all depends on league size, right? Because like working with NFL.com, there's so many different like leagues of different sizes. So right. I try to give like James Robinson is still somehow, at least earlier before waivers ran this week, was still available in like 30% of leagues. Like, I don't care if you're in an 8-team league, like that guy needs to be added. But I understand if you're in a 12-team league, he's not available there. Same thing with like a Josh Kelly. So going a little bit deeper, I think this was a good week for running backs on the waiver wire. Mike Davis looks like he's going to be getting an opportunity. At least the next 3 weeks, he's looking like he'll get an opportunity. And I know he has a tough matchup against the Chargers, but their one weakness against running backs, at least, is in the passing game. They've allowed an average of 6 catches per week. Mike Davis had 8 targets after McCaffrey got hurt last week. So I think Bridgewater has shown us that if they're trailing, he's not afraid to just dump it off and take the easy yardage with the running back. So I like Mike Davis. I think Jerick McKinnon is another back that you can go out and pick up off the waiver wire and just immediately plug into your lineup because I admit it, he's made me look silly the first 2 weeks. Now he's injured, but I was not a Raheem Mostert backer coming into the season because I'm a big believer that system, and it's Kyle Shanahan that leads to all the fantasy goodness in that backfield. And for proof of that, look at the many different running backs he's had success with in his career. It was Carlos Hyde having his career year. He turned Matt Breida from an undrafted player to someone that we wanted to start in fantasy. Tevin Coleman, Raheem Mostert. So he's had a lot of success with running backs. Last year, 5 different running backs finished as their top scoring running back. So it was just a revolving door. I think Jerick McKinnon, though, is in a great spot this week, especially with potentially Kittle sitting out because of that turf. And then you have There's no Jimmy G. You already don't have Deebo Samuel. Someone's going to have to catch the ball there. So I think Jerick McKinnon could see a lot of passes. And then at like other positions, like I think tight end is a really good – there's a lot of good tight ends that you could have gotten off of waivers this week. Like I think Dalton Schultz, and he had 10 targets in week 2. Like who saw that coming? I definitely didn't, but it's a really good matchup in what should be a very high-scoring game against Seattle this week. There's Drew Sample. It looks like Joe Burrow is going to rely on his tight ends this year. He's averaging over 10 passes per game to them, so he slides in there. And then Logan Thomas is another one. I know he let down last week, and someone might have dropped him because he disappointed last week. And if they did, I would grab him and start him because, I mean, it depends on who your regular tight end is. But he's in that mix because he's been seeing a good amount of targets, at least 8 in each game. And then the Browns look right now like the Cardinals of last year, like a team that you can look to pick on with tight ends. So I think this was a good week for running backs and tight ends, not so great for wide receivers.
Very nice, man. Yeah, everybody you've mentioned, that's exactly who I was going after for sure. Now, if you had to choose between Mike Davis this week or Jerick McKinnon in a PPR league, who you grab?
I would go with McKinnon because I think that there's a little bit more certainty with him this week. Like we've seen him used heavily. I have no doubts that he is going to lead that backfield in touches this week. At least I'm very confident that he will. With Mike Davis, he had the 8 targets but only 1 carry. And they do have Curtis Samuel, who played running back in college and can be used a bit. And they've already said they're going to use him more. And then there's also Trent Cannon, who's going to be active now. So, again, it's a tougher matchup, too, against the Chargers for Davis. So I would go with McKinnon, but both of them are RB2s for me this week.
Gotcha, man. One more thing, and then we're going to do some rapid plug.
Let's do it.
You can ask Rank about this one. He took a little while, though. Like, he'd sit there and think. Just wanted to be nice and quick.
I'll say the first thing that comes to mind. It may not be the right answer, but I'll be rapid.
Yeah, I call them Tinkerbells. Like I'm one of those bad. Like I can give anybody advice that works, but when it comes to my own team, I mean, I'm just constantly. I'm a Ruxin basically on that show. I'm bad.
I love that show.
Now, Josh Kelly. I have been singing his praises since the draft. Even though they have Eckler, everybody's like, well, they have Eckler. Well, I mean, somebody was going to fill the Melvin Gordon role.
That's an Austin Eckler bobblehead right there.
That's awesome. But I'm a big believer in Josh Kelly and Eckler as well. I think he's going to step in as for the Gordon role. If you had both of them, Eckler in one of your starting running back positions, and say you have another running back like a I don't know, a McKinnon or something in your flex, would you feel comfortable starting Josh Kelly as well?
Is this a rapid answer or no?
No. This is just a quick question.
Yes, I would feel comfortable. I have both of them inside my top 20. I loved Austin Eckler coming into the season. Like I wrote an article that I was leading his hype train. But I also thought Josh Kelly – I was like you. Like I thought Josh Kelly was being undervalued, and I thought there was a role for him there, and he would be fantasy relevant. And if there's ever a week to play them, it is this one. The Panthers are the best matchup for running backs in fantasy. They're allowing 46 fantasy points per game right now to running backs, by far the most in the league this year. That's after allowing the most fantasy points to running backs last year. They let Josh Jacobs be the RB1 in week 1. They allowed over almost 40 points between Fournette and Jones, with both scoring touchdowns last week. I think Austin Eckler has a big game, but I also think Josh Kelly does as well, and I would not be surprised if he scored a touchdown, maybe even 2 this week.
All right. Awesome, man. Okay. Mr. Mike Florio, are you ready for some rapid plug?
I am. Let's do it.
All right, my man. So before, with Rank, I started off asking him if he liked, Friends or The Office and, pizza or Chinese food and stuff like that. When I asked him whether he liked Breaking Bad or The Walking Dead, he said neither.
What? I got to call him out on that one.
I was going to say, man, there's a little tidbit for you. But I'm going to go through this. I'm going to ask you, start, sit. You just say yes, no.
Real quick, those two little, you can't really see them, but my fiance gave that to me. They're like a Lego Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. So I got to call Rank. I've never seen The Walking Dead, but I got to call Rank out for Breaking Bad.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. I mean, The Walking Dead good show as it is. I mean, it's the same thing over and over. Breaking Bad takes it, #1 show ever made for me.
It's my favorite show of all time. So
my wife and I, we've watched that series through probably 3 times now. Phenomenal.
I think I'm the same, actually. Yeah, it's awesome.
All right, my man. So, start, sit. You just say start, sit. Here we go. You ready?
Yep.
And I think I already know this one. Mike Davis against the Chargers.
I would start.
Okay. CEH against the Ravens.
Start.
McKinnon against the Giants.
Start.
Kelly against the Panthers.
Start.
Cooper Kupp against the Bills.
He is closer to, in like a 2 wide receiver league, he would be a sit, and anything bigger than that, he's a start. Sorry, that wasn't too rapid.
Hey, man, it came out quick. You're good. Gage against the Bears.
Sit.
Sit. All right. AJ Green against the Eagles.
He's like Kupp in a 2 wide receiver league, sit, and anything deeper than that, I think you got to start.
Gotcha. Slayton against the 49ers.
Trying to sit if possible.
Okay. Gallup against Seattle.
I would like him as a flex more than a wide receiver 2.
Gotcha. And then I actually have a buddy of mine asked me to ask this. Josh Kelly or McKinnon?
I have Josh Kelly higher, actually. It's really close. They're back-to-back. I just think Kelly's a little bit safer, but I think McKinnon has the higher ceiling.
Gotcha. Man, that's it for Rapid Plug, man. I had a bunch of them, and then I just started scribbling them out because I figured it was kind of, got to save some time for you. But, my man, it was a pleasure having you on, Michael. Thank you so much. Man, I hope to have you on many, many more times.
I hope to be on many, many more times. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure was all mine, man. Pleasure was all mine. So, remember, Michael Florio on NFL Network, NFL Fantasy Live Analyst. My man's made it to the big time. Also, 8 a.m. Eastern. Forgive me, I had to write it down. Host of Roto Baller, Saturday mornings, 8 a.m. Eastern. Everybody needs to tune in, get your fantasy football teams right. I am Jay the Plug from the Fantasy Football Plug podcast. Again, I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Florio, for being on the show. We will have you again, my friend.
Thank you so much. I look forward to being back.
My pleasure, buddy.